Hello class, this is your teacher Mr. McDougall with your next project tutorial. We've been working all unit long on photography and mastering the exposure. So now we're going to put it all together by doing the exposure triangle manual mode. So manual mode, I touched on during one of the earlier presentations, is one of the settings where there are no more automatic features. You are in full control of the camera. So earlier in the unit, I talked about shooting modes, and this is what we've been practicing when we first started doing the exposure triangle. We practice aperture priority mode for those shots. We took a couple of shots in shutter priority mode and ISO priority mode, which are these ones over here. And again, depends on the camera. They're slightly different. The program, and then on Canon it has TV, but Nikon has S for shutter and A for aperture, but Canon has AV. But they do the exact same thing. But all cameras have this M right here for manual mode. So now for the rest of this unit, you will be shooting to make sure it's on M, which again means you are in full control. You manually set all aspects of the exposure. You set the shutter, you set the aperture, and you set the ISO. The camera will not do it automatically. So now you are in full control of your shots. So what you're going to do is you're going to practice getting hands-on with the camera and experimenting with different manual modes and making sure you have your exposure as a priority. So there's no presentation here. Let me just go over what the classwork is going to look like. Click on the classwork slides and you'll see we're going to go in manual mode. The goal of this is for you guys to start mastering how to be in full control of the camera. So you're going to get your camera and your SD cards. You're going to capture the pictures on the slideshow, the necessary ones, and add them to the slideshow after you've edited them in Lightroom, which is something we've already covered. So again, there's only 5. You can see right here, 5 shots. The first one I'll walk through very quickly. You need to capture this, so pay attention to where it says capture this right here. The first one, someone indoors with no blur or noise, no motion blur or no noise. So again, think back to what does that mean? What do you need to prioritize in your shot? Remember, noise comes from having your ISO too high. So your shot's going to be indoors, which means there might not be a lot of light. So you're going to have to bump up your ISO, but you got to be careful. Take your picture with your ISO higher, but if you get too high, you start risking noise. So the ISO is the priority here, that it's not too high. So you'll have to make other adjustments to the other 2 legs to balance it out. You also don't want your shutter too slow. If your shutter's too slow, you're going to get that motion blur. So this is where, again, you play around with it. Take your time experimenting with your shots. Look through the viewfinder, slowly change your settings, take multiple shots until you get it right. Okay? Photo number 2, a close-up of a person or object in a shallow depth of field. So again, look for the key words in these descriptions. Shallow depth of field is the priority here, and that is controlled by the aperture. If we go back, again, these presentations are all available to you as well. Go back to the aperture presentation. Remember, a shallow depth of field is done by having a lower f-stop number. So your f number, your f-stop, try to make it as low as you can depending on the camera that you're using. Some of them can only go about as low as maybe a 3 or a 4, but try to keep it as low as you can and zoom in on your subject to create that shallow focus. Again, the shallow focus is where they're in focus, the subject is nice, crisp, and clear, and the background is blurry. So that's what you're looking for in this one. So as you change your f-stop, you need to balance out the exposure for everything. So once you lower your f-stop as low as you can, your picture is going to get bright. A lot of light's going to come in. You don't want your picture to be overexposed, so then you need to balance out the other 2, the shutter and the ISO. You cannot change one of the settings without changing all 3. You have to change all 3 of them when you change your shots because they create a balance together to make sure the picture is not too bright and not too dark. So this one, the third one, is the exact opposite. A wide shot, so you can take a wide shot of an area with a deep depth of field. So remember, a deep depth of field is the exact opposite, where your F number is as high as you possibly can. So crank that F number up as high as you can into the F20s or higher to get a nice deep focus where everything's in focus. And as you do this, less light will come in. The circle gets smaller, it will make your image darker as you do that. So again, then you'll need to balance out your ISO and your shutter speed to make sure your picture's not too dark. Number 4, someone running with motion blur. So you need a classmate who's going to run across the camera. And we do want motion blur for this one. We want it to be blurry. Not blurry because it's out of focus. We want motion blur, which means the shutter speed needs to be slow. So the shutter speed is on your camera. It's the one that's in the fraction number. It'll usually be in the lower left corner of your camera. It's the fraction number because it's fractions of a second. So you want it slow, like 1/60th or slower. So 1/60th, 130, 15, anything slower than that will give you a slow shutter speed, making your image very blurry as your person runs across. And remember, as you do this, your image will get brighter. It's letting more light in, so then you need to balance out the aperture and the ISO so it's not too bright. And then lastly, picture number 5, someone jumping in the air with no motion blur. So now you need a cool freeze frame action shot of someone in the air, and there's no blur at all. They're frozen solid. So again, the exact opposite. You're going to crank that shutter speed up as fast as you can, maybe 1/500th or 1/1000th or higher, faster than that. So again, you get that cool freeze frame. And a moving object, it becomes completely frozen with no blur at all. So set your shutter speed to 1/500th or 1/1000th or faster, and then take a shot of your person jumping in the air. When you do this, when you change this, your picture will start to get darker because less light is coming in. So again, balance out the other two. Balance out your f-stop and balance out your ISO so it's not too bright and not too dark. Okay? So those are the 5 shots you're going to take. One other very important thing to keep in mind is that your cameras are now set to RAW. We're going to shoot in RAW, which is something, again, I briefly touched on back in this presentation. RAW versus JPEG. RAW is better as a photographer because you got more detail to work with. It makes it easier to edit because you got more detail in these pixels to make your picture more vibrant and colorful. Your file sizes will be larger, but that's okay because your computers can handle it. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that you must edit them in Lightroom first before you can attach them to the slideshow. So we went over Lightroom in the previous lesson. So as you put your pictures in from your SD card, you'll need to do exactly what we did before. File and import your new photos. So bring in your new photos to add right here from your computer. Import them, and then you can start editing them, and then you need to export them before you can turn them in, just like we did here. After you export them, they will become JPEGs. Right now, they are RAW photos. So if I show you from the card, see how it says CR3? That means it's a RAW photo. You cannot just put a RAW photo on the slideshow because it won't work. Let me show you right here. Here's number 1. This is the RAW photo right out of Camera as is, no editing yet. If I take this image and I try to just drop it on the slideshow, it's going to say it cannot be added because it's invalid. This Google Slides does not recognize RAW, so you have to edit them first. So save them to your computer, open them in Lightroom, edit them like we did before, and then you're going to export them. You're going to export your photos. Once you export them into a new folder, those will be JPEGs that then you can then add to your slideshow. The only thing you'll need to change when you export them is change the folder. So choose your composition folder and then rename them to composition. That way they don't end up back in your other exercise folders from the previous lesson. Okay? So again, that's it. Have a good time. Have fun. Let me know if you have questions. And if you can't figure out how to change your settings on your camera, find me. I will let you know. Depending on the camera you have, sometimes they're different. That's okay. My job is to walk you through it and make it as simple as possible. So experiment, have fun, and show me what you got.